All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our November website chat. Like I was just saying, it's a Thursday that feels like a Friday. We wanted to take the opportunity to go ahead and have a website chat, even though tomorrow's a holiday for many of us. So thanks for making time to join us on a Thursday rather than the Friday that we would typically do. Make sure that everybody can hear me okay. Thumbs up. So like Colette was just mentioning, just a quick reminder to rename yourself so we know who all is joining us today. And be sure to share any comments in the chat, or do always feel free to raise your hand and let us know if you want to ask a question or share a thought or a comment. I want to say a quick shout out to our good friend and colleague, Kenny Kettner, who's joining us from West Texas, Lubbock today. Kenny, I was thinking about you when I heard that there was an earthquake in West Texas, and I'm very curious to know if it was anywhere near you and if you had a chance to feel it.
Yeah, I had not heard that we had an earthquake out here, so I guess I didn't feel it. But,
All right,
yeah,
well,
howdy.
good to see you. Drive safely home. So we wanted to go ahead and have this website chat today because we had a Network Advisory Council meeting yesterday, and there's quite a few updates from that meeting that we wanted to make sure and update you on. We also want to make sure that you're all up to speed on where we are with the administrative rules process that's coming up and some upcoming meetings that we want to make sure that you have on your schedules. So starting off, talking a little bit about the Network Advisory Council, we had some great updates from the Trust for Montana Libraries, the Government Affairs Committee. We shared updates with the NAC about our library development plan and had some good conversations about core services and resource sharing funding. So I want to spend some time going through some of those topics with you today. Starting out with an update from the Trust for Montana Libraries. I know you're all familiar with this 501c3 nonprofit that's getting organized and beginning to grow. They've had a successful year in hiring their first executive director, and they're working hard to grow the membership of the board. They're up to 11 members, and they're excited about the progress that they're making. The NAC was joined yesterday by the current president of the trust, Stu Wilson, their executive director, Kirsten Cooper, and then Bruce Newell, who's the current vice president. They shared information about their current fundraising goals, which include focusing on a really robust early literacy program, more support for work with seniors and creative aging, including a particular program with the Arts Council, support for the courier program, and then a particular need for marketing and public awareness of Montana libraries. And just to speak a little bit more about a couple of these fundraising goals that the trust has, you are all familiar with the Ready to Read program that the Montana State Library has supported and that many libraries have adopted and grown within your own local libraries. The trust is really interested in trying to find kinds of model programs that we could use to use as models for fundraising that really demonstrate the library's role in supporting reading proficiency, something that the state of Montana is woefully behind on. And in particular, thinking about the kinds of partners that we can work with outside the library to support that kind of early literacy programming. So we're in the process of researching what those model programs might look like so that we can use those models for future fundraising by the trust. Stu shared that he thought that fundraising for the courier might be something that could be challenging. It's just one of those kind of unsexy operational items that might not necessarily be of interest to as many fundraisers, but they are aware that the funding is lacking for us to have a truly robust career program that really meets the needs of all Montana libraries and all Montanans. And then finally, the trust has been talking for a while about the need for a really robust marketing campaign for public libraries. That's something that most libraries really don't have the resources or capacity to do locally. It's something that the state library really isn't allowed to do with our primarily federal funding. And there could be opportunities for the trust themselves to manage some kind of marketing program or contract. So that's something that's on their radar to fundraise for as well. And then Bruce talked about an advocacy goal that they are starting to work on in partnership with the Montana Library Association, as well as other foundations from some of our larger public libraries in the state, specifically focused on resource sharing legislation and getting a legislative appropriation to fund that current legislation. I'll talk about that more in just a minute, but there is a subcommittee now of the trust that has started working with representatives from MLA as well as staff from this foundation organization to try to kind of move the needle on that legislative ask. And then to just generate positive information about the work of Montana libraries around the state. So look for more information about the fall fundraising campaign coming from the Trust for Montana Libraries. And if you have opportunities to share that information with people in your communities, we encourage you to do so. The Montana Government Affairs Committee gave an update to the Network Advisory Council presented by Rachel Ron, the library director from the Haverhill County Library. And it was really specific to the legislative goal that I previously mentioned. There is existing legislation. It's MCA 221328, the statewide interlibrary resource sharing program. Colette, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that legislation was passed in about 2009.
Yeah, the last time it was updated was 2009.
And it says that the state library the commission shall establish a statewide interlibrary resource sharing program and administer funds appropriated by the legislature. And then importantly, I think that legislation says that the resource sharing shall exist among libraries, and it really is inclusive of all of us. It's the public libraries, the school libraries, colleges and universities, tribal libraries, nonprofit, medical, educational. I just, the foresight of the people who worked to pass this legislation is really remarkable in ensuring that it is inclusive of our entire library community. What they've recognized is lacking is, of course, that legislative appropriation. The state library budget's just shy of $200,000 a year, half of which goes to fund the shared catalog, and the other half funds the OCLC group services contract. And that split is sort of a legacy of some previous resource sharing funds in the form of interlibrary loan reimbursement that was appropriated 15 plus years ago and was allocated to those two programs at that time because those were the two primary services that we use to support resource sharing. And of course, the umbrella of what it means to support resource sharing has just grown and grown over the years to include things like e-resources, the Montana Library to Go, the Courier, and any number of different kinds of resource sharing opportunities. So the MLA and the trust is interested in proposing a funding request and legislation to the state legislature and state library commission to provide support for an actual appropriation, a meaningful appropriation to support this work. I think the next step for all of us in this particular work is really defining what that statewide interlibrary resource sharing program consists of, and then determining what an appropriate legislative ask might look like. The NAC has targeted their spring meeting, which is going to be in March, to look at what that ask might look like and make recommendations then to the full State Library Commission ahead of our legislative planning process. Stop there and ask if there's any questions about those two items. All right. Again, feel free to post anything in the chat. We'll continue to monitor that. And as always, a quick little stretch break. Free our minds for continued topics of conversation. I've asked, was that a question, Kenny?
No, I was just going to give you an earthquake update.
Earthquake update, please feel free on our little stretch break.
It was in the middle of nowhere in the oil field part of far west Texas, so not close enough to Lubbock, but
not good. Well, I'm glad you're safe and unimpacted. As I mentioned, another topic on the next agenda yesterday was a review of the FY24 Library Development Plan. This plan is really our current fiscal year's goals and objectives that fall under the umbrella of our 5-year LSTA plan to support library development in the state. And I wanted to ask Tracy and Kara to just share some highlights from that plan with all of you.
So Kara, would you like to go first? Because I feel like I always go first, so I'm happy to give you the floor. You want to? And thank you, Colette.
Well,
Go
hi
ahead.
everyone. So the library development staff met at the end of August following the Network Advisory Council retreat to review our progress on fiscal year 23 work and the priorities that we had discussed with NAC at their August retreat, and trying to kind of narrow down what we could realistically accomplish over the course of a year. And we shared those priority projects with the NAC. Of course, we're already midway through fiscal year 24, and so many of these projects are already underway. Tracy and I have been working with Rebecca Camp on refining these goals to make sure that they are SMART goals, that they're more specific, time-bound, and measurable, and so that they really do fit the scope of a fiscal year plan. And as I mentioned in the meeting yesterday, there's a lot of day-to-day work that some of it is represented in this plan, but a lot of it is just kind of our foundational work that we do that is not necessarily explicitly listed in this plan. One of the goals is Montana Shared Catalog Administration, and certainly we have a team that works diligently day in and day out on many different tasks for the shared catalog that's not spelled out very granularly in this plan, but it is represented in this plan. Courier was mentioned as a priority, and we do have some goals here for courier improvement under statewide projects, OCLC, all these resource sharing projects that we've been mentioning have been evolving over time, and so those continue to be priorities under statewide projects. And then we have some things that are under goal 2, hotspot administrative access. Well, we have that funding from the legislature to sustain that program, to help libraries to more directly administer that project. And I think Tracy, 3 and 4 are largely in your team's area. So I'll turn that over to you.
Thanks, Kara. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the plan so I can see it in front of me. As Kara kind of mentioned, the area that I work with, which is the consulting, continuing education, and lifelong learning, does have a number of priorities listed. And so we've been doing quite a bit of work with local government. This is an area that library directors and even board members have asked for assistance just in getting better, I think, about the relationship building and talking about the value of libraries. And so we've been doing quite a bit of work. We started out just we're attending the Montana Association of Counties Conference and the League of Cities and Towns. And that's really given us insight into what's important to local governments and helped us identify ways that public libraries might be able to support items that local city and county officials deeply care about. And we have also started reaching out with our connections. Like, a team taught a session at the fall workshop with a couple of local government officials just to kind of help libraries practice that skill of communicating the value of libraries and listening deeply. And then we've been doing some work with some state partners who also reach out to local government officials just to coordinate our efforts together and have it kind of be inclusive of libraries in the work that you do. We do have some of our typical day-to-day things in this library development plan. If you happen to click on the link that Coley sent you, that includes our ongoing consulting and continuing education efforts. Just going to reach out, build relationships, conduct board trainings. Coley has been doing a fabulous job developing online colleagues as subject matter experts, and then turning our work into something that's hopefully useful for you and very meaningful. As you might imagine, we're a little bit on hold with some of the lifelong learning projects, but we hope to begin the recruitment process for a new lifelong learning librarian. That person will definitely focus on the ready to read and early literacy. We're very, very interested in how we can help support Montana kids reading at or above grade level. That position will also support summer reading efforts, which in the past have proven to be very helpful in reducing the summer slump, as it's called, where kids kind of slide a little in their reading skills. So that position will, of course, be overseeing that program and helping you with that. And then we will be continuing the virtual programming series thanks to Bobby DeMontney. She's going to help us out with the next 2. And we will continue to look for presenters. That's been a very popular series as well. So those are kind of the highlights from my areas. I don't know if anyone has any questions for Kara or myself.
Thanks, Kara and Tracy. As you can all see, there's always a lot going on at the State Library, a lot of things that we're working on. I want to do a big shout out to all of the staff and their roles that they play in helping us achieve the successes that we're able to achieve and better supporting all of you. And thanks to Coley for sharing those dashboards. We share them to help us understand our progress and evaluate the work that we're doing, and also to be transparent with all of you about what the priorities are and the work that is ongoing here at the State Library. So we'll hope that you'll pay attention to those in the future as well. We talked a little bit with the Network Advisory Council about something that we're calling core services conversations. And for those of you who have been a part of conversations about the makeup of the NAC and the Montana Library Network for a few years now, you'll be familiar with this concept of core services. Those are really sort of the underlying services that libraries offer that allow us to be successful in providing library services to our communities. The Network Advisory Council, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, identified these particular services as those core services that are really sort of necessary for libraries to be successful. They include collection management, e-resources, cultural resources, resource sharing, programming, and technology. And these are really the outward facing services that we provide and that the state library helps to support. When we changed the makeup of the Network Advisory Council a few years ago to support the core services and what we refer to as the Montana Library Network, you might recall that we reduced the overall size of the NAC with the idea that we were going to have committees of subject matter experts in each of the areas of these core services to help advise the state library and the Network Advisory Council on the development and enhancement and future direction of these core services. And we've met with sort of varying degrees of success in the implementation of those subcommittees. Some are fairly active, like the Lifelong Learning Core Services Committee that Amelia relied on to help provide advice and guidance on our virtual programming and other kinds of lifelong learning programming needs that exist in libraries. Some of the other core service committees have met in a sort of a more ad hoc way, and some of them really haven't gotten off the ground at all. So we kind of went back to the NAC at their meeting in August and talked to them about some different approaches that we might take to still achieve the goals of having the core service committees, but maybe in some different models. One of the things that the NAC brought to light at that meeting was the fact that the drop-ins that MSL staff have been hosting around a variety of topics have generally been a successful way to engage with Montana librarians to address needs and questions and to create opportunities for conversations. And so we've decided to try to emulate that model around these core services as well. Thinking that instead of somebody having to commit to serving on a committee, we might better garner the input of the library community if those meetings were a little bit more spontaneous and allow for robust conversation without that longer term time commitment. So our goal in having a more conversational approach to our core service development are to continue to encourage that input from the Montana library community to help us continue to plan for the success of these core services, to imagine these services, what they would look like in the future, to continue to evaluate their success, and to really consider these core services in the context of what's important to you and the services of your community. We want to try to hold these conversations at least quarterly, and we want to hold them around a more topical area to give you that context for thinking about these services. The NAC has challenged the state library to hold at least one between now and the end of February, first part of March in their spring meeting. I'd really like to hold at least two. One focused on early literacy and the research that we want to do to help support the trust in their fundraising, as well as sort of resource sharing writ large to help inform the development of legislation around resource sharing. what we think these conversations are going to look like are staff who are involved in supporting those relevant core services that relate to the topic, talking about how those core services support the topic. So, thinking about early literacy, for example, what kinds of programming are we offering that supports early literacy development? What kinds of e-resources investment might continue to help support early literacy? We talked yesterday about the fact that the Montana History Portal is going to host a Lego contest, which is very much in line with some of the early literacy efforts under the Ready to Read program. So how can we use the services that we're offering under the umbrella of these core services to help us achieve those kinds of end goals? And we hope that you and others in the library community will participate in these conversations to help us to continue to advance the work under these core services. So it's a little bit of an experiment, a trial. We'll see how it goes. Look for more information when those get scheduled, and we hope that you'll participate with all of us. I'm gonna again pause and ask if there's any questions, comments. All right. And then the other topic that had a lot of discussion at yesterday's Network Advisory Council meeting was about this single cost share formula idea that we've been talking about. We visited about this idea at your last website chat. And as I said at that time, we are currently evaluating how to identify a cost share formula that would apply for all of our statewide projects that's based on more uniform metrics than we currently use. As you know, the cost share formulas that we have for the shared catalog, for the OCLC group services contract, and Montana Library to Go are really based on their own unique use-based or other kinds of metrics-based formulas. And in the case of a couple of those cost share formulas, they're really broken at this point. They don't apply to the current makeup of those resource sharing programs. And so we've known for a while that we need to make improvements to how we are sharing the costs of those services. And we've talked for a while about trying to come up with a more uniform metric that can be applied in a standard way across the different services that libraries might be participating in. We've proposed a model that's based on population served rather than any kind of other use-based metric. We want to have something that is not use-based because we don't want to have a metric that encourages use, encourages good collection development, that kind of thing. We want to have a single uniform metric just to simplify the cost, the process of maintaining these cost share formulas, and to be able to give all of you more timely information about how the costs might be divided out for your own budgeting purposes. And then the benefit of using a population-based model, especially for public libraries, is that it really does align then with the population-based model for distributing the per capita per square mile state aid. As I said previously in our evaluation of what these costs might look like, some libraries' costs remain the same. Some libraries will see significant decreases in their costs, while other libraries would see fairly significant increases in their costs. As I shared with the NAC yesterday, there's of course no model in which all libraries' costs would be reduced, because we do have to generate enough revenue to pay for the costs of offering these services, largely the contracts with our vendors. And so in order to try to minimize some of those cost swings, one of the things that we're proposing is a 5-year implementation strategy to kind of smooth out the costs that those libraries would see. Some of the questions that were raised during the discussion with the Network Advisory Council yesterday, the cost share formula is really about how we share costs. It doesn't have anything to do with the pricing of those services. So while the cost share formulas are intended to give more certainty and predictability to how we distribute those costs, of course, we anticipate that there will continue to be cost increases in the future as the costs of our contracts and services go up. That's just a nature of providing those kinds of services. So it's not about trying to fix pricing. It's about trying to give more certainty to how those costs are distributed. And then another question that I heard was a question about whether or not we are rolling all the costs together for all of our services into a single cost that's then shared amongst libraries, meaning that there's a shared cost for the shared catalog, Montana Library to Go, and OCLC, that all libraries would help to fund whether or not they participated in those services. And that is not the case. Libraries would only be charged for those services that they participate in. So if someone only participates in OCLC group services and Montana Library to Go, those would be the costs that they would be asked to share. They wouldn't also be asked to share Montana Shared Catalog costs, for example. So while we're talking about a single cost share formula, there still are individual costs for those 3 services that we currently provide. And then, of course, this model could potentially fund, cost share formulas for future services, whatever those might look like. All of the libraries that would see a significant cost increase were individually notified and encouraged to participate in the Network Advisory Council meeting yesterday, and we'll continue to seek feedback from all of them. A couple of the things that we heard yesterday that we need to continue to bear in mind. One is the importance of good communication and talking points that libraries can share with their boards, especially those that are going to see cost increases, because as was pointed out, they're not receiving any new service, any enhanced service, and yet they're going to be asked to pay more. That's a really fair point. And we need to be able to really clearly articulate the value that the libraries are seeing for those costs. And then there was also a question about how the change in designation for tribal college libraries that provide public library services could impact this cost share formula. In the breakdown that the NAC saw yesterday, the tribal college libraries were included in the academic library model, which is a population served based on the student and faculty population of those institutions. But we anticipate that for those tribal college libraries that serve their public and receive state aid, that we would want their population-based model based on their per capita state aid population. And because we haven't yet determined what that population allocation is going to be, we don't have good numbers to plug into this cost share formula. So we need to allow that decision-making process to play out and then see what kind of impact that might have for the tribal college libraries in this model. So the work is not complete, and we did not ask the NAC to make any decisions yesterday. We want to let this work play out. We are planning to provide more information. I think we may actually work on a little video for libraries to share with their library boards about the history of resource sharing, the development of these cost share formulas, some of the challenges that exist with our existing cost share models, and then more information about why and the impacts of making these kinds of changes if this NAC ultimately decides to move forward with a single cost share formula model. The other point that was made at the NAC meeting yesterday is that if we decide to move forward with a model like this, they would have to be voted on by the membership of Montana Library to Go and the Montana Shared Catalog. These are really local costs that come down to the local library for your decision making. A couple of comments in the chat flash up. I just want to make sure that I'm answering any questions, or if you need any additional feedback or have thoughts for us, really appreciate them.
Amy Ewan likes the idea of a video, so we're
Great.
definitely going to work on that.
Great. Yeah. These are incredibly complex issues, and some of us live them much more day to day than other people. So the more information that we can provide to you and help you provide to your boards, the better. Any staff, Kara, Tracy, anybody want to add anything more to this topic than what I shared?
No, I think you summarized it well, Jenny.
Thanks, Kara. All right, I just wanted to provide a reminder on where we are with our public library standards administrative rules process. We've been working through this timeline now for several months. As you know, at the October commission meeting, the commission moved forward draft administrative rules based on the work of the Public Library Standards Task Force. There's draft administrative rules about changing the budget growth requirement to better reflect the realities of encouraging libraries to make sure that they understand what kinds of resources you need to carry forward with the work in your library. The State Library Commission is also moving forward a draft administrative rule that would eliminate the requirement for Montana's 8 largest libraries to have library directors with the Masters of Library Science degree. We still have work to do to amend the formula to distribute state aid to the tribal college libraries. That's something that's not included in these draft administrative rules at this point. Those draft administrative rules are now all published on the state library website. If you just come to our homepage, msl.mt.gov, you'll see one of our carousel items that has a link to information about the draft rules, as well as a link to a public comment form that you can use to submit public comment. We are in the required 30-day public comment period for adopting new and revised administrative rules. That comment period will end at noon on December 1st. We are also holding a public hearing for people to provide additional comments to the State Library Commission. That public hearing will be at 1 p.m. on December 1st. So look for more information about that if you wish to participate in that hearing. And then the commission will formally adopt administrative rules at their December 6th commission meeting. All right. So as I said, our public comment hearing will be held on December 1st. And again, the commission meeting is going to be December 6th. Both of those meetings will have Zoom options. The public hearing will in fact be held entirely via Zoom. The State Library Commission meeting will be here in Helena, and you'll also be able to attend via Zoom as well. And then as always, look for more information about meetings and events at the State Library in our events calendar through Aspen. And I think that it concludes the comments that I wanted to share with all of you. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the work of the state library, anything I shared here today, or other questions that you might have for us. All right, and thanks so much for joining us. I hope you all have a very, very wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Jenny. As always, we'll have a recording of this session available soon and links to resources that we shared in that, but we really appreciate everyone's time and just as Jenny said, have a great weekend.